The Amazing Race 22 is the 22nd installment of the reality television show The Amazing Race. It featured 11 teams of 2, each with a pre-existing relationship, in a race around the world. The season premiered on February 17, 2013, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time PST on CBS and CTV, with the 2-hour season finale on May 5, 2013. Professional hockey players and brothers Jonathan Bates and Anthony Battaglia were the winners of The Amazing Race 22. Production = development and filming =. This season was broadcast in the mid-season of the 2012 Euro 13 TV season. In an interview with TV Guide, Keoghan revealed that the Double Your Money prize introduced in the previous season would not be included in season 22. Instead, the twist this season was that the winners of the first leg were awarded 2 express passes, one for themselves and another that had to be given away to another team before the end of leg 4. The season spanned 30,000 miles through 10 countries in 5 different continents. This season featured the race's first ever visit to the French overseas country of French Polynesia, where teams skydived above the island of Bora Bora. Other tasks and travel destinations included chamois racing in New Zealand, hunting scorpions with bushmen in Botswana, and climbing the north face of the Eiger in Switzerland. Along with French Polynesia, this season also featured the first race visit to the constituent country of Northern Ireland. This season marked the first time that a team had been eliminated while still in possession of the Express Pass since its introduction, as well as the first time a team was subject to 2 separate U-turns during the race. Contestant Dave O'Leary tore his Achilles tendon near the end of leg 2. Though he and his son, Connor, continued in the race for another 2 legs, they elected to withdraw from the competition at the start of leg 5 after Dave was advised by his physician to have surgery on his ankle within 2 weeks of the original injury. Though Dave and Connor traveled to Hanoi, Vietnam, with the remaining teams, they did not participate in any tasks in the leg. Instead, after arriving in Hanoi, they proceeded directly to the pit stop to be formally eliminated. Dave returned to the United States in time to have the surgery to repair the tendon the day before the race's filming completion, and was able to return to compete in the Amazing Race 24 a year later and won along with his son Connor. In leg 5, in order to avoid confusion with the flag of the former independent state of South Vietnam, there were no route markers present in that leg. Previous editions of the program, as well as its international counterparts, have used solid yellow or yellow and white flags instead. However, in what was most likely an oversight, the clue box directly after the U-turn in Hanoi held the standard red and yellow flag. This is especially notable, given the controversy described below. The Leg 5 episode in Hanoi sparked ire amongst some conservative media analysts and viewers for the tasks involving a performance of a communist propaganda song and the brief visit to a B-52 bomber that was shot down by North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War and turned into a memorial for Communist Vietnam's victory. Complaints came in from sources such as the National Commanders of the American Legion and VFW. The Media Research Center's Culture and Media Institute and Liberal Democrat strategist and Fox News Channel pundit Bob Beckel also spoke of their disgust in the program's choices. Yahoo! TV later reported on comments from viewers found on Twitter whose complaints ranged from threatening to no longer watch the series or statements that the episode was weird, or disrespectful to Americans killed in Vietnam. Prior to the start of the episode for Leg 6, CBS aired an apology, noting that portions of the previous episode were insensitive to United States Armed Forces veterans. The message, read by host Phil Keoghan, stated, "We want to apologize to veterans, particularly those who served in Vietnam, as well as to their families and any viewers who were offended by the broadcast. All of us here have the most profound respect for the men and women who fight for our country." During Leg 7, Max and Jennifer were both issued speeding tickets by the Botswana Police Service after going through a speed trap. Botswanan law requires that tickets be paid before the end of the day, so both teams stopped racing in order to pay the fines before moving on. Unlike in previous seasons where racers have been penalized for receiving speeding tickets, the teams did not receive any additional penalties. The final episode was dedicated to David Gene Gibbs, one of the camera crew, who died in a helicopter crash while filming a series for Discovery Channel. Cast == Applications for The Amazing Race 22 were closed on May 24, 2012. The contestants included professional road racing cyclist Conor O'Leary, YouTube vloggers Joey Graceful and Mihan Camarena, professional hockey players and brothers Jonathan Bates and Anthony Battaglia, and former Stealing Angels vocalists Caroline Cuthbert and Jennifer Cool. Chuck and Winona were originally cast for the previous season but pulled out due to a death in their family. Dave and Connor, Caroline and Jennifer, Jessica and John and Joey and Mihan were selected to race in The Amazing Race, All-Stars, made up of returning teams from seasons 14 and Euro 23. Results: the following teams participated in the race, each listed along with their placements in each leg and relationships as identified by the program. Note that this table is not necessarily reflective of all content broadcast on television, owing to the inclusion or exclusion of some data. Placements are listed in finishing order. A red team placement means the team was eliminated. A green E indicates that the team won a fast forward. A purple I micron indicates that the team decided to use the first express pass on that leg. If next to a leg number, it indicates that the team with the first express pass was eliminated on that leg without ever having used it. A magenta E unregistered trademark indicates the team has previously been given the second express pass and used it on that leg. An underlined blue team's placement indicates that the team came in last on a non-elimination leg and had to perform a speed bump during the next leg of the race. An underlined leg number indicates that there was no mandatory rest period at the pit stop and all teams were ordered to continue racing. The first-place team was still awarded a prize for that leg. A brown ash florin or a cyano indicates that the team chose to use one of the two U-turns in a double U-turn. Ash or indicates the team who received it. Ashu indicates that the team was U-turned, but they used the second U-turn on another team. Episode title quotes. Episode titles are often taken from quotes made by the racers. Business in the front, party in the back. A Euro Chuck, loose lip sync ships. A Euro John, like James Bond again. A Euro Mihan, I love monkeys. A Euro Caroline, your tan is totally cool. A Euro Pam, Scorpion King Hunter. A Euro Joey, be safe and don't hit a cow. A Euro Winona, my cheese is out of control. A Euro Caroline, the ultimate fun house. A Euro Joey, working our barrels off. A Euro Bates, beacon of hope. A Euro a non-racer. To Caroline and Jennifer. Prizes: the prize for each leg is awarded to the first-place team for that leg. Trips are sponsored by Travelocity. Leg 1. A Euro 2 express pass is a Euro an item that can be used on the race to skip any one task of the team's choosing. The winning team keeps one for themselves but must relinquish the second to another team before the end of the fourth leg of the race. Leg 2. A Euro A trip for 2 to London. Leg 3. A Euro A trip for 2 to Bangkok. Leg 4. A Euro $5,000 each. Leg 5. A Euro A ski trip for 2 to Whistler. Leg 6. A Euro A trip for 2 to Phuket. Leg 7. A Euro $7,500 each. Leg 8. A Euro A trip for 2 to Bora Bora. Leg 9. A Euro A 2013 Ford Fusion for each. Leg 10. A Euro $10,000 each. Leg 11. A Euro A trip for 2 to the Dominican Republic. Leg 12. A Euro $1 million. Race summary. Leg 1 . Air date: February 17, 2013, Los Angeles, California, United States. Los Angeles to Motumute, Bora Bora, French Polynesia, France. Motipitié, at the starting line of the Amazing Race 22 and Griffith Observatory, teams were informed that the winner of the first leg would win the Express Pass, with the other Express Pass card to be given to another team before at the end of Leg 4. They raced to one of several Ford Fusions where a recording informed them of their first destination, the island of Bora Bora in French Polynesia. The clue also told them that there were only 5 spots on the first flight out of Los Angeles, and the second flight would not arrive until an hour later. Upon landing in Bora Bora Airport, and teams picked up the clue where they found out for the leg's roadblock, teams asked, who's ready to take a giant leap towards $1 million? One team member had to sign up for one of 6 helicopter flights, with only room for 2 racers per flight. They then tandem skydived from over 10,000 feet above the island while their partner would make their way to the landing location on an hour via water taxi. When the team reunited, they would receive their next clue. The clue received directing them to Eden Beach on Moat to Pity A for the second roadblock, asking, "Who likes to play in the sand?" The other team member who did not perform the first roadblock and had to search among 400 sandcastles for a clue buried underneath them. If they did not find the clue, they had to rebuild the sandcastle before continuing. The clue instructed teams to assemble a Vaya outrigger canoe and then paddle 1 mile across the water to the pit stop on Moat to Kafar. Copyright Leg 2 Air date, February 24, 2013, Moat to Tupua, Moat to Tap. The start of the leg had teams heading to Moat to Tupua to the Hilton Bora Bora Nui. Teams had to search the resort grounds for the wedding chapel where a Polynesian priest would give them a safe travel blessing before handing them their next clue. The clue received from a priest where it found out was for the detour, a choice between pick a pearl and take a trunk. For both detours, teams had to pick up a pair of water shoes and snorkeling gear provided to them at the Hilton Bora Bora Nui Chapel. In Pick a Pearl, teams traveled to a point half a mile offshore in the open water where they had to dive beneath the waves to untie lines of pearl oyster shells that they had to shuck open to find 2 red pearls. After finding both pearls, teams had to swim over to an oyster farmer in a boat to exchange them for their next clue. In Take a Trunk, teams dove underwater, wearing special diving helmets, to look for a series of treasure trunks. They then had to take the trunk over to a submerged umbrella and unpack its contents, setting up an underwater picnic table. Once the table was set up properly, an underwater waiter would give them their next clue. The clues instructed teams to take personal watercrafts and a local map to guide themselves to Moat to Tap, referred to as the most photographed isle in the South Pacific, where their next clue would be found, and directing them to the roadblock, asked, "Who's a well-balanced individual?" One team member participated in a traditional Polynesian test of strength, walking on a pair of sparring stilts while kicking a coconut across a 35-yard stretch of beach. If the racer fell off the stilts, he or she had to return to the starting line, but the position of the coconut would not be reset. Once the racer had successfully kicked the coconut over the finish line, the team would be able to advance to the pit stop nearby. Leg 3 Air date, March 3, 2013. Moat to Mute to Christchurch, New Zealand, wind whistle, Mourne, wind whistle. At the start of the leg, teams were told them to fly to Phil's hometown of Christchurch, New Zealand. Upon arrival, teams had to find marked Ford Focuses and drive themselves to the Raka River Gorge and wind whistle. Once there, they picked a number for a jet boat that would take them up the river the following day, requiring teams to set up camp overnight. The next day, the boats took teams upriver to their next clue, which was the detour, Reverend It Up or Reel It In. Both detour choices required teams to use all-terrain vehicles to reach the detour tasks. In Reverend It Up, both team members had to drive a modified vintage car through a set of cones in under a combined 83 seconds. Once both racers completed the course within the time limit, they would receive their next clue from race car driver Flash. In Reel It In, each team member had to use a rod and reel to catch one fish that was at least 12 inches long. Once both fish were caught, champion fisherman Dirk would give them their next clue. The clues teams received instructed them to Mount Hutt Station in Mourne where they encountered the roadblock, asking them, "Who wants to keep the race from going to the dogs?" One team member ran a muddy obstacle course known as a shemuzzle. After dressing in gumboots, stubbies shorts, and a burlap sack, team members picked a shepherd and farm dog and then ran through the course where they would be covered in molasses and feathers, climbed over hay bales, then finally rode an inner tube down a slide into a manure pond, all while collecting chicken eggs along the way, that they put in a basket at the end of the course. Once they had 12 unbroken eggs in their basket, a task that could take multiple runs of the course, a shepherd would give them their next clue, directing them to head to Wind Whistle's terrace downs for the pit stop. However, teams were told to keep racing and Phil gave them their next clue. Equals leg 4 equals. Air date, March 10, 2013, Christchurch to Denpasar, Bali, Indonesia, Ubud, Gianyar, Badung, Badung. The clue teams received at the pit stop were given informed of their next location, the Indonesian island of Bali. Once on Bali, teams headed to the Kenanga Terracotta restaurant, where they may have completed a challenge. However, this destination was completely unaired. Next, they traveled to the Ubud monkey forest where they had to pick up a coconut and then leave it for one of the crab-eating macaques to open. Once the coconut was cracked open, a monkey expert would retrieve the canister inside that held their next clue. The clue that found out was for the detour, a choice of sandy bottom and fruity top. In sandy bottom, teams dredged volcanic sand from the bottom of the Awang River, placed the sand into baskets atop their heads, then transported it 200 yards uphill and emptied their baskets into a larger container. Once they filled their container to a designated line, the brickmaker would give them their next clue. In fruity top, after donning sarongs, teams had to prepare a traditional Balinese religious offering known as a jebagan, made from various arranged fruits. It would then be carried in a procession to the Pura Desa Puisi temple in Batun where it would be blessed before it would be placed on an altar. Once complete, the local priest would give them their next clue. The clues sent teams to the Uluwatu surf beach in Kita for the roadblock, asked, "Who's ready to get totally tubular and be worked in a Wainali challenge?" One team member had to go to Kitut's surf shop and search amongst several surfboards for one that had the image of someone they had all previously seen on the race. They were left to figure out that they were meant to look for an image of the Tahitian priest from Bora Bora. After taking a surfboard, teams had to search for their partner and then meet Phil at the pit stop nearby. Phil would only check teams and if they had the correct surfboard. They would be turned back otherwise. Equals leg 5 equals. Air date, March 17, 2013, Denpasar to Hanoi, Vietnam, Hanoi. At the start of the leg, teams were informed of their next destination, Hanoi, Vietnam, warning of the upcoming U-turn. Upon arriving in Hanoi, teams had to head to Ra Pka Ngha Centen Theatre Gallery 42 for the roadblock, whose clue asked, "Who's ready to take in the sights and sounds of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam?" The chosen team member watched a performance of a Vietnamese patriotic song. At the end of the performance, a phrase was displayed on the stage. Without being allowed to take any notes, racers had 5 minutes to search the nearby gallery for one of several political posters featuring the phrase. If they picked a poster with the correct quote, the judge would give them their next clue. If the racers did not find the correct quote within the allotted time, they had to watch the performance again before being allowed to continue searching. The clue sent teams to Ca Ng via Ntho Ngnhant where they participated in the traditional Vietnamese bamboo dance known as Ma Za Pi. Once the dance was performed correctly, they would be given their next clue for the detour, make your move or make your meal. In Make Your Move, teams went to the Temple of Literature where they had to set up a human chess board. Using a nearby Kartai Degree ONG board as a guide, teams had to find 4 human chess pieces that had symbols matching the pieces on the board and then set them up with 4 staffs in position on the human chess board. After putting each piece in the right position, the chess master would hand them their next clue. In Make Your Meal, teams had to prepare Vietnam's national dish Phở Huay. After picking up 2 empty baskets and 2 baskets of live chickens at the Nok Son Temple, teams had to navigate through a street market to pick up the rest of the ingredients on a shopping list, all with specific weights and amounts, and then find a cooking station to cook the soup. After preparing 2 bowls of Phở Huay Gar, the chef would do a taste test and if it was cooked properly he would give teams their next clue. The clues sent teams to the Down B-52 at Hayutthaya Lake where they encountered the blind double U-turn stand. Pam and Winnie chose to U-turn Joey and Mihan, while Joey and Mihan decided to U-turn Chuck and Winona. The clue teams received after the U-turn told them to head to the National Museum of Vietnamese History for the pit stop. Equals leg 6 equals. Air date, March 24, 2013, Hanoi, Hanoi to Mourne, Botswana, Mourne to Macgadikgardipans National Park, Macgadikgardipans National Park, Macgadikgardipans National Park. At the start of the leg, teams were informed to travel to the city of Mourne in the Kalahari Desert. They would have to figure out on their own that Mourne was in Botswana and tell this to a security guard at a designated travel agency before he would allow them inside to purchase their tickets. Upon arriving in Mourne, teams then signed up for one of several charter flights that would take them to the Xumaga airstrip in Macgadikgardipans National Park. Upon arrival, they found a jar and picked a clue inside. The clue which found out was for the roadblock. Teams asked, "Who wants to make a new friend?" One team member selected a group of Kalahari Bushmen who would accompany the team throughout the rest of the leg. They followed the Bushmen to a hole where they would have to dig up a scorpion. After one of the Bushmen put the scorpion into the jar that held the roadblock clue, he would lead the racer to a stump that held their next clue. The clue teams received where they instructed to take their group of Bushmen in their car to the clue box for the detour, fire or foul. Both detour tasks required teams to mimic the animal sounds and mimicry made by their group of Bushmen while walking to the detour sites. In fire, teams traveled with their Bushmen to a nearby village where they had to learn how to properly make fire using 2 sticks, zebra manure, and grass. Once they had a flame, they had to use it to light the elder Bushman's pipe in order to receive their next clue. In fowl, teams had to learn how to set up a trap in order to catch a guinea fowl, utilizing a series of sticks, string, and eggs. After setting up the trap properly, teams had to act as a guinea fowl and trip the trap before receiving their next clue. The clue directed teams to the Mino A Quena Safari Camp for the pit stop. Leg 7 equals. Air date, March 31, 2013, Mourne, Mourne. At the start of the leg, teams traveled to the Bora village's Makaro polling station where they encountered their next clue. However, for Max and Katie, where they encountered their speed bump and had to complete a traditional beaded skirt and then wear them while performing a ceremonial seduction dance before they were allowed to continue racing. The fast forward where team members had the chance to water ski for over a mile on the waters of the Okavango Delta, home to dangerous Nile crocodiles. Other teams had to take the roadblock where asking, "Who wants to go up a creek without a paddle?" And they had to transport 2 goats downriver to a delivery point by using the traditional dugout canoe known as a makaro. The team member performing the roadblock had to control the makaro via punting while his or her teammate looked after the goats. Once the goats had been delivered and the team returned to the start point, they would receive their next clue. The clue were told teams to take water taxis up the Famalucan River and then safari taxis to the Royal Tree Lodge Game Preserve where they could find their next clue for the detour, brains or brawn. In brains, teams had to go on a horseback safari and spot 10 wooden cutouts representing animals found in Botswana. They then traveled to a nearby campsite where from memory they arranged a set of tiles featuring the silhouettes of the animals they saw in the order they appeared. The catch was that there were tiles for animals they did not see and there was no tile representing the hippopotamus, but there was one for the heron. If teams were incorrect, they had to complete the safari again before being allowed another try at arranging the tiles. In brawn, teams had to fill a traditional sand sledge with firewood and then, using a carrot dangling from a stick, coax a team of donkeys to pull the sledge to a campsite over a 1 or 2 mile away. Once the wood was unloaded from the sledge, teams would receive their next clue. Either task allowed teams to search the game preserve for the pit stop. Leg 8 equals. Air date, April 14, 2013, Mourne to Zurich, Switzerland, Cloton to Grindelwald, Grindelwald, Grindelwald to Klienskedg, Klienskedg, Klienskedg to Jungfraujoch, Jungfraujoch, Jungfraujoch to the Eiger, Eiger, Eiger to Grund, Grund, Grindelwald. At the start of the leg, teams were told to head to Zurich, Switzerland. Upon arriving at the airport, teams were told to search for a conductor in a red hat for their next clue. They were told to then head to Grindelwald and wait at Kirch Grindelwald for an Alpine shepherd who would give them their next clue. The clue instructed teams to travel to Klienskedg and head to the Hotel Bellevue des Alpes to pick up a Swiss rescue companion, leaving them to discover they were going to pick up a St. Bernard dog. They then travelled with the dog to Jungfraujoch, home to Europe's highest railway station, and deliver their St. Bernard to a mountain rescue guide, and then were allowed to search the Sphinx Observatory for their next clue. The clue were received at the observatory, informing them to head to the Eigerseigerwand railway station for the roadblock, asking, "Who wants to enjoy the sights?" At the railway station's observation deck, one teammate had to traverse the north face of the Eiger, where they would pick up their climbing buddy, the Travelocity roaming gnome. Once they were back inside the observation deck, they could read their next clue found on the bottom of the gnome. The clue told them to travel to Grund. Once in Grund, teams had to cross the La 1/4 Tschien Bra 1/4 GGLI bridge, then follow the sound of the Swiss Alp horn to receive their next clue, where they encountered a switchback. Teams revisited the Swiss cheese-carrying task of the Amazing Race 14. This time, teams used a traditional Grindelwald sled to transport a total of 4 50-pound wheels of cheese downhill to a barn. Once they delivered all 4 wheels of cheese, the Cheesemeister would give them their next clue, allowing them to head to the Bodmy Snowboard and Ski School in Grindelwald for the pit stop. Leg 9 = Air date, April 21, 2013. Interlaken to Basel, Basel, Switzerland, and Mulhouse, France to Dresden, Germany, Dresden, Berlin, 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 Berlin. At the start of the leg, teams were told to travel to their next destination, Dresden, Germany. After taking the train from Interlaken to Basel, and then flying to Dresden. Upon arrival, teams had to head to the Saxon State Ministry of Finance and pick up a Ford Fusion and answer 3 questions asked on the My Ford Touch system to find out their next destination. Who said tear down this wall? Who did he say it to? And where did President Reagan say it? Upon arriving at the Brandenburg Gate, teams picked up their clue, sending them to the Park in Berlin, the tallest building in Berlin, where they were told they would both have to base jump from its roof. Once they had made it to the landing site, their jump master would give them the clue for the detour, train trials or Font Follies. In train trials, teams drove themselves to the Deutsches Technik Museum, where they had to build a model train track circuit using all of the provided pieces in such a way that the circuit fit on a provided platform. Once the train made one full lap on the circuit without falling apart, derailing, or hitting any pieces of scenery, the conductor would give them their next clue. In Font Follies, teams had to travel to Alexanderplatz, pick up 2 large neon alphabet letters, and transport them on foot to the Buchstabe Museum. Once they arrived at the museum with 2 intact letters, the museum curator would give them their next clue. The clues from the detour sent teams to the Salon zur Wilden Renate nightclub in Old East Berlin for the roadblock, where they asked, "Who wants to go trippin'?" One team member had to answer a question €, who said it Binny in Berliner. €, and then enter a labyrinth located beneath the nightclub. They were searching for a white room that had their next clue stuck on its walls. The clue sent teams to the pit stop at Kurfür 1/4 Ostendens Joachimsthaler Platz. Leg 10 = Air date, April 28, 2013, Berlin to Edinburgh, Scotland, United Kingdom, Long Nidri, Edinburgh, 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 Edinburgh. At the start of the leg, teams were told their next destination city, Edinburgh, Scotland. Upon arriving in Edinburgh, teams picked up a marked Ford Fiesta to drive themselves to Gosford House in Long Nidri for the roadblock, asking, "Who has the deep lungs and strong legs of a Royal Scot?" One team member had to dress in the uniform of the Royal Scots Regiment and learn to play a drone on a set of bagpipes while marching with the Royal Scots Pipers in Gosford House's Marble Room for 2 minutes. When the bagpipes instructor was pleased with their performance, he would award them their next clue. The clue received sending teams to Edinburgh's Craigmillar Castle, which warned them for the upcoming U-turn. Upon arrival, Mona and Beth encountered their speed bump, where they had to play a game of skittles, a traditional British form of 10-pin bowling. Once they managed to score a floor, they would be able to continue racing with the other racers. At the Craigmillar Castle, the teams searching the castle's fireplaces for their next clue. The clue turned out to be for the detour, choosing between Tasty Puddin' or Whiskey Rollin'. In Tasty Puddin', teams traveled to the Sheephead Inn in Duddingston where they had to prepare haggis with oatmeal and ox intestine, in the presence of a Robert Burns impersonator who recited Burns' poem addressed to a haggis. Once they each prepared 4 portions of haggis and had a taste of one, they would be given the next clue. In Whiskey Rollin', teams rolled 8 barrels of Scotch whiskey up a slope, delivering them to a party. Once they delivered all 8 barrels, a Scottish country dancer would give them their next clue. The clue sent teams to Duddingston Kirk, where they found the double U-turn stand. Bates and Anthony had to choose U-turn Joey and Meehan, while Max and Katie had also to choose U-turn Mona and Beth. The clue teams received after the U-turn and told them to head to Nidri Street South in Edinburgh's Old Town for the pit stop. Leg 11 . Air date, May 5, 2013, Edinburgh to Stranraer, Stranraer to Belfast, Northern Ireland, County Armagh, Belfast, Belfast, Belfast. At the start of the leg, teams were told that their next destination was Belfast, Northern Ireland. Upon arriving in the port of Belfast, teams used a marked Ford Fiesta to drive themselves to Peatlands Park where they encountered the roadblock, asking, "Who wants to get bogged down?" One team member had to bog snorkel. After donning full snorkeling gear, including complete wetsuit and flippers, the racer had to cannonball into a muddy pool, then swim one 100-yard lap in the bog within 4 minutes. When they finished in time, the bog snorkeling official would award them their next clue. The clue instructed teams to find the thing with a ring, leaving them to figure out it referred to the Beacon of Hope sculpture in Thanksgiving Square which had a clue for the detour, try it or spray it. In Try It, teams had to go to the dry dock at Titanic Quarter where the RMS Titanic was built, where they had to prepare and serve the ship's last 5-course dinner to a group of first-class passengers. Using the provided menu as well as a seating chart, teams had to choose the proper dishes for each course from a table full of unmarked plates and serve them to the passengers in the dining room in the dry dock. When the waiter was satisfied that each passenger received the correct order for each course of the dinner, the team was allowed to move on to the next course. Once all 5 courses were served correctly, a Captain Edward Smith impersonator would give them their next clue. In Spray It, teams had to go to a skate park located in a warehouse where they had to finish half of a graffiti painting using a photograph as reference. When the crew approved of the job, teams would receive their next clue. The clues sent teams to the pit stop at Ulster Hall. Leg 12 . Air date, May 5, 2013, Belfast to Liverpool, England, Liverpool to London, Camden, London to Washington, D.C., USA, Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., Mount Vernon, Virginia. At the start of the leg, teams were instructed to head over to Liverpool by ferry and then to London in the Euston Tap Pub. At the pub, teams had to order a pint of beer for each racer before they were given their next clue, their final destination city of the American capital, Washington, D.C. Upon arriving in Washington, teams were told to head to where Martin Luther King, Jr., gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, leaving them to figure out it was the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Once they found the spot on the steps where he gave the speech, a man nearby would give them their next clue, instructing them to head to 1100 Pennsylvania Avenue, the location of the old post office pavilion. Once there, they would be escorted by a Secret Service agent, and were told they were to have their photograph taken with President Barack Obama. In reality, they were taken to a souvenir photography studio where they posed for a photograph in which their face was superimposed over a photograph of someone else meeting President Obama, where their next clue was located on the back of the photograph. The clue teams were instructed them to head to the tidal basin where they had to search for a marked car near the paddleboat docks. After knocking on the rear passenger side window 3 times, the car's occupant would give them a briefcase, holding their next clue, the roadblock, asking, "Who's ready for some cover-ups?" Teams participated in a switchback from the spy roadblock from the family edition. One team member had to take the briefcase they received from the marked car, and then find one of 50 spies around the tidal basin who would respond to their given code phrase with another supplied code phrase. The team member would then swap briefcases with the spy, and the spy would tell them that the combination code to open their new briefcase was their final placements in New Zealand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, with the next clue as inside the briefcase. The clue teams received from the briefcase and instructed them to head to the home of the Nats, leaving teams to figure out that their next destination was Nationals Park, home of the Washington Nationals. At the park, one team member had to ride a zip line across the stadium and toss a baseball, while their partner, dressed in a baseball mascot costume, had to try to catch it. Once they successfully caught the ball, they could read it to see it had Haynes Point written on it, their next destination. Upon arriving at Haynes Point, teams had to enter a giant ball pit to find globes marked with the various countries they had visited on the race. Only one team member was allowed in the pit at one time, with their partner taking the globes passed to them and putting them in the order in which they visited them. Once their order was correct, another globe would open revealing their last clue, which directed them to go to the home of the first president. Teams were left to figure out this was referring to George Washington's Mount Vernon, the site of the finish line. Ratings: no episode aired on April 7, 2013, due to CBS and CTV's broadcasts of the Academy of Country Music Awards. US Nielsen ratings equals, Episode 2, Loose Lip Sync Ships, aired on the same night as the 85th Academy Awards. Episode 7, Be Safe and Don't Hit a Cow, aired on Easter Sunday. The broadcast was subsequently delayed by 41 minutes in the Eastern Central Market due to the 2013 NCAA Men's Division I basketball tournament's Midwest Regional and South Regional final matches. Episode 8, My Cheese is Out of Control, was delayed by 56 minutes in the Eastern Central Market due to the final day of the 2013 Masters Golf Tournament. Canadian ratings equals, Canadian broadcaster CTV also aired The Amazing Race on Sundays. Episodes aired at 8 p.m. Eastern and Central, with two exceptions. The broadcast of the second episode conflicted with CTV's broadcast of the 85th Academy Awards. The Amazing Race was instead shown at 8 p.m. in the Atlantic Time Zone, at 7 p.m. in the Eastern Time Zone, and at 6 p.m. in the Central Time Zone, and immediately after the broadcast of the Oscars in the Pacific and Mountain Time Zones. The broadcast of the ninth episode conflicted with CTV's broadcast of the 2013 Juno Awards. The Amazing Race was instead shown at 7 p.m. in each time zone across the country. Notes. References. External links, official website.